And I would encourage you to kind of pay attention to the difference between the way the story is presented to children and the way the story is presented from the Bible itself. And the story travels throughout 3 full chapters of Genesis. So we're going to skip around here a little bit as we read this story of Noah and the ark. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from earth the human beings I have created, people, together with the animals and creepy things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. These are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark is 300 cubits. A cubit is from the elbow to the tip of the finger, so about 1.5 feet. So the ark is 450 feet long. Its width, 50 cubits. Its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and put the door of the ark on its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I am going to bring a flood of waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which there is breath of life. Everything that is on earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wives, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing, of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God had commanded him. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent out a raven, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent out the dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set its foot, and it returned to him into the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took it and brought it into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent out the dove, and it did not return to him any more. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature in all flesh, and the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on earth." The word of the Lord. Did you notice a bit of a difference between the way that is presented and the way that it is presented to children? So often this is a story that is tamed down to the point that you can get just about everything conceivable for a little child's room in Noah's Ark. You can get the pictures, you can get the posters, you can get the puzzles, you can get the little animals, you can get, just everything that has to do with Noah's Ark. And yet this story, this wonderful and terrible story, if we take it as a whole, is something that you might not want to use in a child's room. You might not even want to hear it in church. That evil has taken over the whole world. That violence and corruption are everywhere that you look, and God is sorry that He made human beings. Sorry that He made the earth at all, and He is going to destroy it all. Just completely start over. Send a flood over all of the earth and wipe out not only humankind, but all of the animals, all of the plants, everything. He's just going to wipe it all out. Except that there's this man named Noah, who is a righteous man, who follows the ways of God, who knows God intimately. And God comes to talk to Noah about what He's planning and how He wants Noah to be a part of what will become the recreation of the entire world. So when we look at stories like this, and we look at stories like Adam and Eve and the creation in 6 days, and this story of Noah, the story of Jonah and the whale, some of the stories of Moses, separating the Red Sea, tapping a rock to get water, some of those stories of Moses. You might wonder how I, as your pastor, understand these stories. Of course, over time, people have understood these stories in different ways. And even today, there are people that insist, good and faithful Christian and Jewish and all sorts of people understand these stories to be literally true stories, that there actually was a flood that covered the whole earth except for Noah and the animals and his family on the ark. So there are people that understand them to be literal stories. And then on the other side of the pendulum are people that understand these as total myths. Just interesting stories to bring us somehow some message from God. The way that I understand these stories is that if God had wanted this story to be a true story, if God had wanted to send a flood over the whole earth, if God had wanted to make the world in 6 24-hour periods, if God had wanted to swallow up Jonah in the belly of the whale, if God had wanted Moses to separate the sea by holding his stick up, God could have done all of those things. God is able to do those kind of things. But I personally don't think that most of those stories are things that God actually did. If somebody was there with a movie camera, could they film all of this that happened? I don't think so. But that's my personal observation, the way that I have dealt with these from years of studying and thinking about it. I, like most of you, when you're in Sunday school, you learn to take them literally, and then as you start to think critically, as you grow, you might think differently of them. So what do I do with these stories then if I don't think that they probably happened, but they could have if God wanted them to happen? What I do is I try to read them as if they were literally true. I try to read them, if at all possible, with an understanding like the first people that heard them would have understood them. And then I try to understand these stories for our day and our age. Because I think God is more than able to take a story that was written thousands and thousands of years ago, and I believe inspired by God, to be written for our edification. So what is it that the people of the time would have gotten from the story? What is it that people over time have gotten from the story? And what is it that we can get from the story? So that's how I treat these types of stories. And the question first would be, how would the people who first heard this story, how would they understand it? There were similar stories, I'm told, in different cultures, in different cultures from around the world. There are several flood stories, not unlike this story. But this story is the only one of those stories that has a God that saves the world with just one man and his wife and his 3 sons and his 3 daughters-in-law, bringing all of the animals from all over the world. He left off the unicorns and all of the dinosaurs, but he got everything else. So this is a story that they would have heard of God's anger and God's wrath and God's sense of justice coming upon a world that had become corrupted. And then they would have heard of the joy of God's grace and mercy in Noah and the family, living through all of that and then repopulating the world. And God reforesting the world. We read about the dove going out to find what could be found. And imagine this. After all of that flood waters and things, there's already an olive tree growing. And the bird brings the olive tree, part of the olive tree, back to Noah, so he knows that the flood is over. And soon he will be able to open the door, let it air out in there, and let the animals out to do their thing. But how does this story fit for us today? As many of us came today especially because the church council has announced and sent out postcards and announced for several weeks that we're having a special meeting today to talk about finances. How does this story help us who are concerned about what it is that we're going to hear and concerned about how, what the future of the church is? So how does the story fit for us who sit here maybe with a little trepidation, maybe with some wonder of what we're going to hear after worship? What is the future of this church? Well, in my studies this week, I listened to a podcast. Dr. Rolf Jacobson is a professor at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And he has an explanation for this story that he says after years of trying to figure out this story and how to reconcile all of the death and destruction with the life of Noah and the promise that God brings at the end of the story. And Dr. Jacobson says that in the light of the brokenness of the whole world, there's a struggle in this story between God's sense of justice and God's sense of mercy and faithfulness. And that God looks at the wickedness of the world. And it doesn't sound like things have changed much since the days before Noah, some days when we look at the news. And God's sense of justice is so tried that he considers starting over. Isn't that what many of us do when something that we're working on doesn't work out? We might be working on a hobby craft of some kind and it's not working out, and we are tempted at least to throw the whole thing away and start over. It might be a dinner we're trying to cook and something burns and I can't serve that, and now I have to start all over. And God has that sense that he must trash the whole thing. But in the story, God's sense of love and mercy wins out. Just barely. Just barely, God's sense of love and mercy wins out. God commits to a new and different way to renew and heal creation. Humankind in this story is not changed. Noah and his family come out of the ark, and in the very next chapter they're sinning and doing things that they ought to be doing already. So humans aren't changed in this story, but it seems that God is changed in this story. God no longer looks on the wickedness of humankind and says, I'm going to start over. I'm going to trash the whole thing. God has made a promise that comes at the end of this story. A promise to Noah and his family and to the whole of creation. In the story, God includes all of creation, the animals, the creeping things, the fish and the birds, and all things living. plants, animals, and people. And he promises never again to trash the whole thing. And God says that when he sees the bow in the sky, that it's a reminder to him. It's not a reminder to us. It's a reminder to God that he has promised, that he has made a covenant with us and the whole of creation to be with us for all of eternity. And that is the promise that we can hold tight to today and always. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's stand.